Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros discussion around using transparency to drive sales performance, sponsored by the team at Spiff. Before we jump into our conversation today, we get the opportunity to meet our panelists, two returning panelists, but both here for the first time in 2021, which congratulations, Tanner and Pete, we made it to 2021.
Woohoo!
Good work. But before we jump into our content today, we want to make sure we get to know our panelists just a little bit more. So, Pete, obviously, aside from modern sales and Atrium and writing a book, any new hobbies that you've picked up or honed since the start of the coronavirus pandemic?
I think the one thing I've been doing a very good job of is we've been doing Friday pizza night with my family, with my wife and my 3-year-old. We've gotten very good at making pizza, and even some of the toppings make it onto the pizza now without my 3-year-old kind of like snaking them out of the mise en place bowls ahead of time. So that's kind of our new hobby, Friday night pizza night.
I love it. What's the go-to pizza in Pete Kazanji household?
Oh man, you gotta like change it up. You got like, your regular pizzas, your white pizzas. He's really into olives, so we've done like multiple types of olives. So variety.
Your 3-year-olds with olives.
I know, it's bizarre, right? His grandpa says that he's like, oh man, those are like grandpa repellent on there. But yeah, he just like mainlines the Kalamata olives, the regular black olives, the green olives. I mean, he's like San Francisco bougie baby, I guess. But yeah, he's an olive king.
That's impressive. Just wait until he can say, no, these aren't free range olives, Dad. Send them back. How dare you? I love it. And Tanner, it's always great to see you and have you on with us here. It's been the first time in 2021. So anything new that you've picked up since the start of the pandemic?
So, I mean, hobbies is kind of tough because I think a lot of times people say like when you pick up a hobby, it's something that you enjoy and something you look forward to. So we moved back to Utah during the pandemic because my 2-bedroom apartment that I was paying way too much money for in South Bay just wasn't cutting it. So we bought a home in Salt Lake City. And now that I'm spending so much time here, the guilt got to me to like fix things up and finish things. So we finished the fence on our house. And I am like a day away from finishing my office and an extra bedroom in my basement, and we did everything. So we did the wiring, we did the framing, the painting, the drywall. Like I'm putting on the last coat of paint today. So I was up until about 2 or 3 in the morning last night painting. So I got a friend with me right here that's helping me a little energy. But no, so we've been really investing time in our house, which has been like fun in a way. It's not my favorite thing, but it's been a hobby, I guess, something we've been doing.
It's at least new.
Yeah, it's something. The enjoyable meter on it is here hit and miss, but it'll be nice when it's done.
Well, come for the discussion about driving sales performance, and stay for the pizza and home improvement tips. I think we got a little bit of something for everybody here today. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I know you're both incredibly busy. Thank you so much for taking some time to join us here today. We're going to jump into it, folks. So for those of you who aren't aware, today's session is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community of revenue leaders. So these are folks in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our community members where they can answer the questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own. Whether that's through bringing on great panelists like Pete and Tanner to talk about a topic that's top of mind in the community, our amazing online forum, and once we get the jab, returning to in-person events, which are some of the most fun and amazing ways to meet some great folks. Our 22,000 community members represent over 6,000 companies. Membership is free, and for those of you who aren't members that are on today, you'll be invited to join shortly afterwards. But today's session wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship of the team at Spiff. I'm going to hand it over to Tanner to say just a few words about Spiff. Tanner?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So for those of you who haven't heard about Spiff before, we are a we're a lot of things, right? But in essential, we're a business automation platform focused on commissions and commission automation. So we're taking things out of your current systems, automating that, and making it real time and transparent for everyone. So we're solving the age old problem of how much am I getting paid, when am I getting paid, and also the newer and newer age problem of friction between different departments because of commission payments and bonuses. So we're focused on making it motivating, on making it a good experience for everyone, and to really like make comp motivating.
Awesome. Thank you, Tanner. And we're excited to be working with you throughout 2021, as we did in 2020 and 2019 before that. Well, folks, we're going to give our panelists just a second here to introduce themselves, but just in terms of background, this conversation actually, or this session today, spawned out of a conversation in the Modern Sales Pros Forum, talking about what and how we can use transparency, and more through the lens of how do we make sure a rep knows if I close just one more deal, I'm going to make that much more. So it's exciting to see that come to life here. But we'll give our panelists a second just to introduce themselves. And first, Tanner, go ahead. You said a little bit about Spiff, but please introduce yourself. And then Pete, same to you.
I really need to update my headshot. That makes
I was
me
just thinking
self-conscious.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, Tanner, it's like you're way younger. I have way more hair. Like, we got to get updates.
Yeah, we got. It's a good call out. So I mean, pretty simple. Right, currently I run go-to-market strategy at Spiff, but I'm also one of the co-founders. So I've been lucky enough to wear just about every hat except engineering throughout the process. So ops, sales, running my own deals, coaching on deals. More like recently, I'm focusing a lot more on the strategy as we've been lucky enough to really grow and scale.
Excellent. And I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of MSP, which everybody here already knows about, and also one of the founders of Atrium, makers of data-driven sales management software. So we make software that helps AE, SDR, and CSM managers use data to better manage their team and improve outcomes. So kind of a complementary narrative to what Spiff works on, and occasionally I get to join fun events like this.
We're excited to have you both here today. And for our audience members, as you heard, two folks with strong backgrounds in data-driven management, performance management, and the related, so much so that they founded companies in that space. Before we jump into our programming here today, just two housekeeping notes. First and foremost, folks, please do use the Q&A panel to ask any questions that you have. That's going to allow us to make sure that if we need to follow up afterwards, we can hit you with some even better content. And that also allows us to make sure our panelists have time to really understand, process, and answer your question fully, as opposed to getting a little bit on the fly and going, yes. Secondly, the first question that is always asked, will the recording be made available? The answer is yes. Recording will be made available about 24 hours afterwards, and that will be sent out to everybody here today. In addition, it'll be up on the Modern Sales Pros YouTube channel, and it will be available on our website on the MSP Post Events page. So with that, Pete, Tanner, should we jump into it? What do you think?
I think it'll be great. Yep.
Let's do it. All right, folks. So today we're going to cover a couple of these topic areas. First, we're going to get started with how do you set goals that allow for transparency? Next, we're going to dive into making decisions that enable greater transparency across your organization. And then we're going to wrap up with the importance of transparency specifically for compensation and how to use your tech stack to really enable and support what we're talking about here today. So a lot of great topic areas, and we're going to try to get through all in the next 40 minutes or so. But with that, Tanner, let's get started with you here. How can we start to think about maybe the art of goal setting? How do we set goals that allow for transparency?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about this, right, as we've been prepping for this conversation today. And I keep going back to a pretty basic thing that's probably could even go without saying, but it's just simplicity in the goals that you set. Transparency is hard enough, let alone creating transparency around something extremely complex. And like more than that, there's a lot of science behind the fact of keeping things pretty simple. Like the simpler and more straightforward a goal is, a process is, whatever, the more likelihood anyone can follow it. So I really just think when we're goal setting, we're looking at this and we're thinking about transparency. Is it simple enough for you to explain in 1 to 2 sentences? Could you write it down pretty quickly? Could you build it pretty quickly in an Excel doc? I mean, however you're going to be doing it, I think is foundational for setting goals to be transparent.
I think that's a great point. And Tanner, I know you sit in a very privileged position. Spiff's got a fair amount of customers, and you're also very passionate about sort of goals and metrics. Is there like a best practice number of, how many layers maybe a comp plan has to have? Sometimes you hear no more than 3, sometimes it doesn't matter. Like what have you seen work? And I know it depends.
Yes, I can say it depends, right? But what we've seen in the data that we're collecting, right, is that generally it's about 2 to 4, depending on the different roles. So now, like, not all those 2 to 4 different, we call them rules internally, but just like different parts of your comp plan or of whatever, or just the goals in general, right, is they're not always equal. Like an example is like quota attainment is not equal to a month spiff for who sells the biggest deal. But they're equal in the fact that they're both a goal that you should be adding transparency to. Generally, what you're going to see is kind of a main KPI for AEs. It's generally going to be like net new ARR or quota attainment. For BDRs, it's going to be some sort of pipeline or meeting setup. And then you usually have something that complements that. Oftentimes with AEs, you'll have like one-time revenue or pro serve that you're going to be doing a different type of calc on. BDRs often have something that's tied to deals they set that close,
Right.
And then like you're going to have book of businesses for CSM, but you generally have more than one, so that allows more than one way to add comp, but much more than 3 or 4 starts to get so much where it's one of those, they'll start to lose their thunder a little bit.
We don't want that. You don't need to have reps that have applied math degrees figuring out how much they need to pay. Like it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm in the bonus land now.
Not a lot of those reps out there.
Not
Not all those people out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's be clear. Yeah.
No, Pete, and I know, Pete, obviously a lot of thoughts on this space, but I know one of the things that you always talk about and sort of preach is around leading indicators and how we can do things to act as that. Share that with the audience here. I think that's a great.
Yeah, so I think that an important thing around like transparent goals as related to like data-driven management and goal-orientated management, not from a lagging indicator like bookings, like Tanner was talking about, is making sure that there's clarity in the minds of like the SDRs or the AEs or the AMCSMs about the connection between those leading indicators and those outputs, as opposed to like, I'm just making this up, I'm pulling it out of my ear and I'm like holding you accountable to it. And so if you like create that linkage and like probably not whiteboard it, but like say, hey, look, for instance, Mr. or Ms. AE or AE team, here is our bookings goal that we're quoted on a monthly or quarterly basis. And then here historically has been the aggregate win rate, the aggregate ASP, the aggregate new opportunity ownership for across the team, and the total number of customer faces, like, and see how that linkage lines up right there. Like, look, I'm not pulling this out right of nowhere. This is the reason why it's defensible, right? So it's like justified and defensible, because then they're like, oh, this isn't just because Tanner's a mean sales manager. He might be that also, but he's a mean sales manager that has like math backing here. Because ultimately at the end of the day, what like performance compensation and data-driven management is all about, it's like driving more success of the individual through data and through transparency of variable compensation. And so if they don't believe that and they don't have that linkage, they're just like, it's harder for those ICs to really get behind those leading indicator goals.
Well, and I feel like this would too, as a recovering VP of sales, I feel like this does give you a little bit of defense around just double the quota. We've never heard that before from a board or.
I was gonna say from an investor.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Just double the quotas. I mean, can't you just double the quotas, Pete?
Right, because then what will happen is the AEs will. That's right. They'll go from having 15 meetings a week to 30 meetings a week. Oh, wait a minute. When do they sleep? Oh, right. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and I think that, and this is, this is a question we talked about a little bit in prep. There's some organizations that are on today that are, maybe don't have historical, maybe data to pull on their P. What would a best practice be for them to start to come up with some of this so they could actually justify the math?
Yeah. So when I talked about this in another MSP event around, like managing via goals and setting, what was it? Setting goals that don't suck. There's kind of like 4 ways to make sure that you're setting goals that don't suck. One is by looking at historical data. Is this justified? How, like, how many ops have our AEs managed on a per time interval basis, or how many customer facing meetings have they done per week or per month or whatever? What has that historical win rate? That's just one approach, right? And so Rich is saying, well, what if you don't, like, what if you have crappy data and you don't have that historical information? Well, the good news is, like, the second thing you can do is you can do bottoms up, like we were just kind of describing, and saying, hey, here's how we can connect, this win rate, or sorry, bookings through win rate, through ASP, through deal cycle to opportunity ownership, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially doing like a bottoms up and saying, is this like tenable? Like the example we were saying earlier about, like, oh yeah, just have 30 meetings in a week. Yeah, no. And then the third thing that you can do is you can have, you do some benchmarking, right? So what you can do is you can, like, understand what other organizations that have a similar sales motion to yours will do. And these are things that, like, when customers start working with Atrium, we do all of these different things. Like, Atrium makes it really easy for you to look at historical data, but then also our customer success team literally kind of goes through this process with organizations that kind of help them get that tight. And really, then when you're like coalescing on a goal, you kind of use all these things together and, like, kind of like, go like this and then set and then iterate. So those are the kind of the ways to approach that, even if your historical data is kind of crapped up.
I think that's an important part of this, and then also be willing to change and be honest with what the data says, intellectually honest. So great question coming in here, and Tanner, let's start with you on this. But Pete, I'm sure you have some perspective on this as well. Tanner, you mentioned, hey, sometimes SDRs are gold on closed won, which is a little bit outside of their control. What are some of the KPIs that you build on that, or do you have a formula or any thoughts on how you could get started kind of enacting that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll give you my 2 cents on it. I think Pete's going to come in with a lot better answer than I do, but we're actually going through this process right now as we're redoing our BDR comp plan over at Spiff. And it's really tough because I don't like giving people goals that they have not a lot of control over. So like for us, we're actually making a very, very small percentage of their OTE to on closed won deals. We're not actually like holding them accountable, although it is something we coach to. So like we are like coaching to it. We're keeping track of, like, in general, how many ops that are closed are set by our BDR team, and we're doing that. We actually just raised the percentage of what they receive on deals that close, hopefully just to help foster a better thing. For us, what we really focus on, other than the close rate, is just what is a qualified lead. Like, who are we targeting? We're trying to solve the problem at the root, and hope that that help the hypothesis flow there. But I mean, I don't know that I have a great answer. The only thing I would say is where you could probably get more granular is if they do have more control. Sometimes I see like pod structures where like like an SDR actually is working through things more, or if you're generally working through an internal business, like your SDRs or BDRs are actually working a book of business model where they're trying to sell into existing accounts, you probably have a little bit more control there. And then I just think you have to trust the data. You have to look and see, like, what's a realistic goal. But again, I just think it's hard to actually, most situations don't allow SDRs, BDRs to control very much of that outcome besides just setting up a good appointment.
Yeah, I think what you want to do there is, like, treat it like a kicker.
Yeah.
Right. And so usually what, like, Tanner's getting it exactly right, which is you want to have the goal beyond something that is, like, within the internal, like the individual's internal locus of control, like something that they can actually, they can control. And so if you have a situation where, like, I get that we would want to comp them on ultimately, like, things that close, but the problem is there's a linkage there where, like, the AE potentially, does a bad job on it, or whatever, like if that SDR is tied with an AE or 2 AEs who are maybe not amazing. There's that problem that's potentially demotivating. The other thing too is that like now you're going to end up in a situation where like SDRs look like backseat driving, right? So if instead what you can do is you can pull forward like the leading indicators of a sick op and then comp on that, right? And measure on that. So as Tanner, I was on a call with someone named Connor earlier. As Tanner was saying, if you have those indicators of what is a qualified opportunity, comp on that, because they have that as and so those might be external signifiers. Like I'll use Atrium as an example. So we have like an internal ops scoring model where we say, hey, we're going to go ahead and look at the number of SDRs plus AEs plus AMCSMs in an organization, because that's like linearly correlated with the value of an opportunity to our org. We're going to put a little bit of a kicker in there for the number of sales ops people that are in the organization as well. And then we have like a field on the op that the SDR fills out with like the op score there. We actually haven't comped different op scores differently, but you totally can imagine that we could do that. But what we do is we say, here's a floor. Like if it's below this score, like don't even create the op, because like, and by the way, like DQ them, right? Because then we know that those are the leading indicators to something that's going to turn into a legit something that is a legit opportunity that could turn into a transaction, and then the SDR is out of it, right? So to the extent that you can pull that forward, the better off you are. And then moreover, you can comp on it. So I'm glad that we talked about this, because now I'm like, oh, well, maybe we should, we should like pay, $50 on these meetings and $75 on a meeting with an op that's above a certain op score, but not wait for the close necessarily. Maybe on a kicker, but not required.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, I like that idea of the kicker because it's outside of their control. And then Pete, the great point that you made there, just to reiterate for our audience, is really think about what the leading indicators are of a great opportunity or a great closed won account, and pull that as forward as you can into the SDRs. What's kind of in their center of control. And I know we've got a lot to talk about, so folks, keep the questions coming. But I want to change gears a little bit, right? We've talked about, hey, how do you kind of get started with this? How do you set goals that allow it? How do you enact or affect greater transparency in your organization? How do you create a culture of transparency? And Pete, I know this is near and dear to your heart. How do you get started kind of creating that culture?
Yeah, and I think the answer to that, so you guys may hear me, I keep saying the phrase like data-driven management, data-driven management. And really what it comes down to is like management is a bunch of stuff. Like you do a bunch of stuff, right? You have like pipeline reviews, you have Monday meetings, you got stand-ups, all these different things. And so the idea of like data-driven management is essentially just like infusing data into all kind of parts of your operating rhythm, right? So if you decompose what your week looks like, what your month looks like, there's usually like an operating rhythm of meetings, whether it's executive meetings and team meetings, like the SDR meeting, the AE meeting. And so to your one-on-ones, and to the extent that you can layer data and reporting and goals and things like that into those operating cadences, the better off that you're going to be, because it just shows up everywhere. And so like, back in the before times when we were able to go in the office, some of the ways that people would do this is they would like, they put TVs up on the walls and they'd say like, hey, cool, like clearly we're data driven because like we have TVs on the walls with like squiggly charts that nobody looks at, right? Unfortunately, like that's not, and kind of the digital equivalent to that is like, oh, well, we had the sales ops team create a bunch of dashboards and then lo and behold, like nobody ever looked at them again, right? Like that's like not infusing data into your operating cadence. Like it's got to show up. It's got to show up everywhere. And it's got to be like embedded in meeting invites and embedded in agendas and so on and so forth. So like, I think the answer to the question is just like infusing it everywhere. Just kind of like, I know Rich is a big Patriots football fan, like infusing a culture of excellence into everything you do your job, right? So it's about infusing that, because then people are like, okay, cool. Like this is just part of it. Like we're going to be held accountable to this, and I should manage myself like this as well. So, there's like, this is just how we roll.
And Tanner, I know you're a big proponent of sort of communication and communicating everywhere. How do you approach this in addition to what Pete was saying?
I mean, first things first, I think we need to talk about the statement about how the Patriots were excellent this year, because they finished the season so strong, Rich. But anyways, I don't know why I threw that in there. Everyone just ignore me. So no, like I think the biggest part of all this, and like Pete, I agree so much. Like I think it's so funny when you get into Oregon, you're trying to look at how they do things. Like, we have a Salesforce dashboard. Well, no one looks at the Salesforce dashboard. Like if you do, they're not using it. It's hardly ever updated. I mean, obviously it depends on the org, but I think and no matter what we do on how we're setting goals or how we're talking to things, we fail if we're not communicating it correctly. So like, what are we doing in our one-on-ones? What are we doing in our all hands meetings? Like goals, anything you set, unless you're hitting it on top of the head multiple times, it's like, and very consistently, it's going to fall, it's going to drop. So like, I'm a big component of, and I think most people here are, is like effective one-on-ones, and that being something that managers are coaching their managers on, and like good effective communication loops inside the company. And also like management team, making sure that culture, or they build a culture of transparency throughout the organization, and also what their goals are, what your goals are, and just to continue to hit it over and over again.
Well, I think distribution of this information ends up being a very important, like you may have heard me when I was talking about distribution. And I know one of the things, so we at Atrium we only have 6 AEs right now, but we're doubling the AE organization. So I don't quite have commission automation software in place, but one of the things I'm excited about there is that, reps only get they only get a commission, usually, right? Reps only get a commission statement like, once a month, maybe, or what have you. And so the problem is like, that's not super frequent. Whereas like, if they can understand, oh, here's how I'm tracking towards XYZ, man, maybe I won't, binge watch 4 episodes of Succession tonight. That's my new is Succession. Maybe I won't do that. Maybe I'll set up the rest of my week with like prospecting. But like, what drives that sort of self-management behavior is transparency and like distribution of this information. And I, so like, the more that you can distribute and this information such that people can make their own individual decisions, the better off you are there.
Yeah, like let's say like recents, like we talk about like recency bias all the time, right? When we're like seeing something, and that's a tool we should be using in management, right? Like it's a like, that might not be the right phrase, but it's like
yeah.
But it's like, you should be, like, it's, who cares if it's superficial or not? Like they should feel motivated on a pretty consistent basis and reminded how they succeed, and also where they stand. Like if they're not succeeding, that's just as important to make sure they know where that's at so they can hit their goals. And that goes across the board. This isn't just sales. I mean, I think we're talking specific, and sales is generally pretty tangible in its goals and its outcomes. So it's really easy, but everyone in the organization should be held accountable to something.
Do you guys have that yet, Tanner? Like, close win and off, and a spiff alert fires to the AE and is like, just like literally just does the math for them and be like, you just earned $2,300.
Yeah.
Okay. That was nice. I guess I'll go do some prospecting.
Yeah, no kidding. No, yeah, I wish, man. I wish it was $2,300 every time it happened, but no, it's cool. Later, soon come.
Later, yeah. But future feature, future request.
Well, I mean, we've started to hit on this a little bit, but like, why is transparent? And this sounds like such a silly question to ask, but why is transparency with compensation important? Like how does that help folks out there?
Well, I think like one of the things that, so back in the day, like performance compensation kind of came from 2 things. One was it drives marginal behavior, like kind of the joke I was just saying, like, oh, instead of binge watching Succession, I'm gonna like, spend those 2 hours cranking out, like doing a bunch of prospecting. It drives marginal behavior, because as an individual, that like that's gonna happen. The other thing that it would do too is it kind of allows an organization to hedge their bets. So if for whatever reason somebody doesn't work out in 6 months, you ended up not having to like, the business didn't lose as much money on that as if they were fully loaded. That latter case is kind of going away because like now we've got like leading indicator like analytics and kind of like data-driven management stuff. So it's very quickly, if like somebody's like 2 months into their ramp and they're not getting there, it's kind of like, okay, cool. Like we got to intervene or like pull the ripcord here. But I think the important thing is still really like that marginal behavior, like that extra grinderness. And I think people nowadays really appreciate it because I know that Tanner he's got his Apple Watch on. I've got my Fitbit on. I've got my, my treadmill desk right here, where essentially like I know that like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and jump on doing this marginal effort because there's this benefit. There's this benefit for me. And so I think that's like the more the individual can understand, like, oh, okay, cool. Here's the link. I guess to use Tanner's example, the recency bias, like here's the connection between this marginal action and this output that's going to be like useful for me and help pay for, the drywall in my downstairs office, for instance, or like, the nice date night with me and my girlfriend or what have you. The more that it drives that, right? Like we want that nice feedback loop. And so that doesn't show up. You don't drive that marginal effort unless you've got that good feedback loop going, which kind of cascades from better transparency.
Yeah. So like when we were prepping for this, I think you used the Peloton as an example of like just like immediate feedback and how anyways, I just wanted to add that in there because I thought that was pretty insightful when we were prepping. But totally agree.
Yeah, I think the Peloton example is a great one in terms of driving, all right, cool. I want to do it. The gamification really plays in there. Tanner, from the comp perspective, right? Why is it important to understand kind of the what ifs of this? I mean, this whole conversation started back in MSP with like, hey, how do I motivate my reps to do that next marginal action?
Yeah, I mean, I think like obviously something we're passionate about, and I am just like as well over at Spiff. It's like seeing possibilities and seeing that like believing is what drives motivation, right? When you actually feel and you can see it, and the more tangible it gets, the more likely you are to hit it. So when you can actually see a scenario where it says, hey, I have these deals in my pipe. If I close half of them, I hit my next accelerator. Like you're getting the whole cycle of motivation there, and you know what you need to do to succeed, assuming that you've given the rep the tools they need to do the job. So it's just, again, just like transparency layered on top of transparency. And like even deeper than this too, like just kind of going one step deeper on this talk around just like the what ifs is like we should be focusing on driving job satisfaction as well as performance, and they should go hand in hand. Nothing. Right. The only thing more expensive than a bad comp structure is a bad comp structure that like loses all your people, right? Like it's if you could lose too many people, you're going to pay this cost. I think it's funny when we talk like when we talk with customers or even just friends or in passing about, I mean, maybe I need to change my life if me and my friends are talking about comp structures. But like when you talk about that, like a lot of the times people are trying to pinch pennies or they're trying to figure out how you cap or how you do things. But like what you don't think about is when someone else isn't doing that and the rep feels like they're being limited, like the switching cost of BDRs, AEs is high. Depending on your org, it could be $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 per head that you hire, depending on how you do it, between training and ramp and like everything. And so like, and that's just the minimum depending on that. So like when you're doing this, there's so much more in it than just making sure that people know how to succeed. It's also making sure they're happy. And if you do it right, those go hand in hand.
I think that the data that I think we've seen on that is it's about 7 months salary to replace, like a 7 month salary to replace a seller or an SDR. And if it's a sales manager, you're into years of salary. We're not talking about months at that point. So great points there, Tanner.
I think the interesting thing there is like essentially you have like two different types of carrots. There's like because sales is hard. And like SDRing is hard because it's like sales is just replete with rejection. And like if you're doing well, you're winning 20% or 30, like maybe 30%, I don't know, like 20 or 25% of your deals. And so like I see this with my reps all the time. One of the examples I was saying earlier about like, oh, what, motivating marginal behavior, like not watching that extra episode or 2 episodes of Succession, instead doing prospecting. But it's even on a deal by deal basis, to Tanner's point earlier about, okay, cool. Here are my ducks on the pond. Here are my next 10 ops. Here are my next 20 ops. Which of these can I potentially pull in? Because there's essentially like actions associated with each of those ops. Like, oh man, I guess like maybe I could, multi-thread a little harder in that one right there. Versus oftentimes what will happen with reps is like either A, they won't think about it, or B, they will think about it and be like, well, if I spend 15 minutes to hit each of these, this contact, this contact, this contact, this contact in that account, there's whatever proportion, like whatever percentage chance that I'm going to get like, rejection out of that, or what have you, or maybe I won't get a response, or what have you, like, you know what, maybe I'll just skip it. Versus like, oh, well, man, that's a 30K op right there. And, that represents a $3,000 rip on that. And moreover, if I can pull it forward into this month, maybe it's $4,500 instead. All right, well, maybe I don't feel so bad about potentially not getting a response to these emails, right? And so it's like there's like, that's like that marginal effort carrot, and then there's there's like the kind of like the end cap too, which is, oh, and I'm glad I did all that effort for last month, because I'm very like, even though my job is hard, it is very satisfying to me, the fact that like, I got a $6,000, $8,000 commission check this month because of that accelerated marginal effort last month or last quarter or what have you.
And I think this is a great convo. I feel like we could riff on this for a while, but Tanner, live question coming in, and I think this is best suited for you from Sandra here, around, do you believe you should put the what if scenarios into the CRM or in an AE dashboard? Like, how do you actually put that in front of the AEs?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think the answer is really dependent on your tech stack. There's different softwares that do different things, right? Like we internally use lots of different tools. We use Salesforce, and we do have dashboards on Salesforce for each individual. We use our own tool, Spiff, which we tend to, we're a little biased towards that, right? Where we use that for a lot of our own dashboarding. We also use Atrium. We use Pete's company for our BDRs, and for me is when I'm managing our BDR team currently. But like it really depends, but it should be somewhere. If Salesforce or your CRM is the best spot for your deal data, it's probably the spot you should go. The thing I would say is that you want to try to minimize the spots that people are going to one or two places. So like if you're using Salesforce and you're using some sort of dashboarding tool, and you're using Atrium, and you're using whatever, try to find some way to consolidate it so that it's simple to find and easy to look at. And the more visible it is, the more likely it's going to take effect. So again, I think I kind of probably didn't give the best direct answer there. Pete probably has some profound data to share with us on that, but no, I think it's important.
I think what you're describing is exactly right. One of the ways that kind of hack that is just, if you have multiple different places where things live. So like use this as an example. I think what Sandra's asking about is like, do you want to be able to put scenario comp stuff into the CRM so somebody could have that? So maybe there's like an amount field, and then you've got like an expected comp field next to it that's like, I don't know, like a formula field that takes the amount and multiplies it by like 10% or whatever your kind of like your rip is on a deal. Well, if you then have like a very basic report that's coming off of that, okay, cool, like that could be totally fine. Just make sure that is like bookmarked in every rep's like Chrome, right, in their web browser. Because and this kind of goes back to our previous thing we were talking about like distribution and infusing things everywhere. So we have essentially we call it AE Quick Links. It's just like this massive Google Doc that just has like every single hyperlink that an AE could need. So for instance, you could imagine like it has our team dashboard, our Monday morning team dashboard that comes from Atrium, and it has some of our pipeline review stuff that comes out of Atrium. It also has some of our usage reporting our customer usage reporting out of Salesforce, it's just another hyperlink. It's like in there. And so, you can imagine doing something similar where you could say like, oh, expect like what if comp scenarios, and that just hyperlinks off to, the Spiff dashboard, or alternatively, you do it internally, it just hyperlinks to that report, right? So just making it, you can reduce the level of like, where is that thing again, by just like consolidating those things
Totally.
into a link dump. And then moreover, just getting super prescriptive about with your reps, where it's just like, yeah, I want to actually see this bookmarked on everyone's thing. Yeah, share your screen, guys. Yeah, share your screen. We're just gonna do it in team meeting right now. It'll take 5 minutes. I know, right? That because then what you're gonna make sure is that people are actually consuming that information, which I think is kind of the intention. What Sandra's like, if I can put this next to the op, then good things will happen, because that way
Totally.
people see like, oh, I can get $2,500 off of this. Ooh, I better like, get after it, right? So like just distribute it as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think just one thing as we're thinking about this, something to be careful with any type of visibility on things is we got to make sure they're right, or at least that they're close to being right. Like we've seen, like just kind of like time old tale of using the CRM for things like this is that things change, right? And so nothing's more demotivating than thinking you made $5,000 and coming to find out that you only made 2 because there was an error in the calculated field inside of Salesforce. So that would be my only advice there too, is making sure it's somewhere that you can set things pretty easily. And you can, like Salesforce or any CRM, it's pretty robust. You can build some pretty complicated stuff in there. Managing it can always be like a little bit different or difficult, right? But I would just like harp on the fact that like, if you're going to have it, make sure it's right, because otherwise it's going to cause more headache than help in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the approach that we're describing right now is kind of like the booty version, where you would just have like a formula field, but like Lord knows, only in the most simplistic compensation plans are you going to be able to do that. And then it's like, oh, okay, cool. Well, does the amount include professional services or does it not? And then I remember you and I, when we were talking about this like a year and a half ago, when I was first learning about Spiff, and we were kind of like talking through like ROI arguments for it. Like I, as an ops, like as a person with a particular operations bent, I'm all about the automation, because I'm like, okay, well, it takes me about a half hour per AE to do comp, and that's just going to go linear with the number of AEs and SDRs that I have. And so at a certain point, that just becomes kind of a pain in the ass. And then you brought up a really interesting point. You're like, yeah, but then there's also the compliance and like loss components of it. So you could imagine if you're like, misarticulating to somebody the amount of money that they're gonna make, and then lo and behold, there's like a presto changeo switcheroo on them. Like, not only is it demotivating, potentially like you maybe just did something that like, the California regulators would like to have a conversation with you about. And so that's actually one of the reasons why once I get to the 10 AEs or whatever, I'm looking forward to getting out of the business of Google Sheets commissions, just to make sure that I'm not screwing things up and exposing Atrium to potential like liability problems. In addition to like the transparency benefits, the automation benefits, and all that sort of stuff. But it's also just kind of like CYA, because you don't want to tell people the wrong thing and then potentially end up on the wrong side of a lawsuit.
I mean, we've started to hit on this. We've only got a little bit of time left. So folks, we've got these panelists for about another 15 minutes or so. So please do start putting your questions in the question answer panel. But Pete and Tanner, before we go to the live Q&A, how do you get your tech stack, and how do you use your tech stack to make it happen? Pete, you mentioned a little bit about this, but it's helpful to kind of hear how you're doing it. And Tanner, we'll hear from you on this as well.
So how do you set up your tech stack in order to have transparency of goals and metrics? Well, the thing that we talk about at Atrium is kind of like this pyramid. It's like Maslow's hierarchy. Everybody remembers back to high school. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of data-driven management. And really what it comes down to is like, what are the metrics? This is my pyramid. Can you see? What are the metrics you're going to track? They ought to be tracking. Can you capture the data in order to calculate those metrics? Can you do the reporting? Can you set goals on that? And then the higher order ones are, then are you actually looking at it, right? Because creating dashboarding or reporting and then like nobody looking at it is obviously useless. And then are you doing like interpretation, kind of diagnosis based on it? And so, historically doing that whole stack is really kind of like a heavy lift. One of the reasons why we started Atrium was to just like automate that whole stack to say like, hey, these are the metrics that matter. We're hooking into the various systems that you use to do your job, and we're going to be able to calculate all these metrics and just monitor them for you. But there's a bunch of different ways that you can kind of skin the cat in a more manual fashion, kind of depending on what what your current tech stack looks like. So I think the first thing would be is like, what are some kind of good meat and potatoes metrics that you should be tracking, like leading indicator metrics that you should be tracking on a more granular basis. And usually it kind of depends on your level of maturity. Maybe it's like customer facing meeting volume is usually like people track pipe. So like how many ops do people have? How much pipe? But oftentimes that's where they start. And so getting one level deeper there might be, what is our customer facing meeting volume? What is our new ops that are showing up in a given time interval? And then like a metric around like just rough activity. I'm thinking more about AEs right now. So like maybe unique accounts that have been touched in a given interval. And so if that's like your basics there, like beyond pipe and ops, then it's like, are we doing a good job of capturing that information, like email volume, meeting volume, and a lot of existing sales engagement software out there, like whether you're talking about like SalesLoft or Outreach or Groove or whatever, can log a lot of that information into the CRM, even if people just like don't have that like the switch flipped on. So if you like do those two things, at least now you have the data captured, such that later on you can then go and build the relevant reporting and kind of progress up that maturity model there. So like those are some of the ways of like either or like that's the framework by which to think about it. And then secondarily, oftentimes you have stuff that's already in the cupboard that you can use to kind of take those first steps.
I love it. And Tanner, where would you recommend? How do you recommend folks getting their tech stack set up to really make this happen?
Yeah, so just kind of piggybacking off what Pete said, I think when you are shopping for software, one of the things the thing you should care the most about is how that system talks with other systems. Like it's a system can have all the bells and whistles, but if it doesn't talk to your other systems, it'll still be there. It won't be worthless, but it'll be much harder to actually get a good ROI on it. So when you're looking, make sure people have open APIs. Make sure people have maybe even like look in the Salesforce App Exchange or the NetSuite App Exchange. Look for like things that work with your current tech stack. And also, again, try to consolidate. Like Salesforce is a great spot to consolidate a lot of this. We, again, very biased here, so take it for what it's worth, but we consolidate a lot of our stuff inside Spiff because we can pull anything from the CRM and visualize that for our reps. And so I think it just depends a lot about your tech stack, your philosophy, your company, what you're doing. But just let your systems talk and be consistent. So don't try to make changes too often. Get yourself in a spot where the changes you make are small, incremental, and to improving rather than changing the course of the Titanic every time you make an adjustment. So that's my 2 cents on that.
This is awesome, folks. And we got about 10 minutes left with Pete and Tanner here, so we're going to have a little bit of time for some questions. First question coming in here is from Zach Harris. And Pete, let's start with you on this one because it is more of an ops-centric question than Tanner. We can have you in. But Zach is asking, hey, from an ops perspective, how do you walk that fine line between providing transparency, but also keeping the appropriate private information private from the rest of the team, but doing it in a way where it's not too manual? I know like in my past life, we used to have everyone had their own comp spreadsheet and their own comp calculator. And then to Tanner's point, anytime that we made a change in the formula, we had to go update 17 sheets in the United States and 6 in EMEA and then 3 in APJ. And it was freaking, it was a delightful time. We loved it. Very happy for it. But how do you walk that fine line between transparency and also really like being effective and not having things be too manual?
Yeah, well, I think what my quick reaction to that is, unless you're in like a fairly scaled organization, where you have, substantially different sales motions and like different books of business or what have you, which I think is not a ton of the MSP's audience. Usually like everyone's probably on the same comp plan, right? And or at least from a proportion of bookings or a proportion of ARR or what have you. And so if that is the case, then I wouldn't 100% worry too much about like privacy or whatever, because like use my AEs as an example. They all, like, everybody knows how much bookings everybody else did last month, the month before that, et cetera, et cetera. And because everybody's on the same the same rip, like everybody knows what everybody else is making in that regard, right? And that's a good thing, because then like there's no kind of like palace intrigue or what have you. So I guess what my kind of take would be there, at least with like, and this kind of goes to Tanner's point about keeping it simple. Unless there's like a compelling reason to have different people on different comp plans, and I don't mean like that AE1 is on this comp plan and AE2 is on that comp plan. Like, you should have transparency around that, and people should know, like, yeah, that person's a senior AE. They've been here for 3 years. Their quota is high. Like, their base is higher, but their quota is higher higher as well. So unless there's a compelling reason to have differentiation there, I would say like just save yourself the pain associated with like trying to keep things, quote unquote private, if you will, and just have people kind of more consistent across the board. And I think that's just is like a compensation best practice in general. Like, don't pay different people different amounts for different work, because then you can get into all sorts of like weird kind of like equity and bias situations, which I don't think you necessarily want to be in be involved in. So that, I mean, I didn't directly answer the question. I kind of more like thought about the question under the question, but that would kind of be my immediate reaction to that.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything like profound to say on how to make it easy from an ops perspective. I think just, again, like a surrounding concept that I probably talked too much about, but I think a lot of this also depends on the management of it and the management of your processes and how your company looks at goals and achievement. I actually think there's a healthy amount of visibility into others that is good. Obviously, like Pete said, you don't want to talk about like comp or equity or anything like that. But a lot of the times, like even a lot of the things that you're looking at, like a Salesforce report or any type of CRM report, I guess, like isn't the end of like, in fact, a lot of times it's motivating, especially depending on your salespeople, but salespeople by default are generally pretty competitive. And so it can create a cool thing there. Or that can create a cool dynamic. There's some cool softwares out there that can help with that too. But I mean, again, I think a lot of this depends on the resources that you have, the tech stack that you're using to allow you to kind of customize those reports and permission those depending on what you do and don't want to be public.
Yeah, one of the things that really surprised us at Atrium, we were looking at, because we view Atrium as primarily a tool for SDR managers, AE managers, and like second level AE managers, second level SDR managers, and the operations people that help them. But one of the things that we found was that AEs and SDRs were very frequently going and looking at other reps, what's known as a profile page in Atrium, in order to see like where that person was doing on their goals. And I think it makes sense, right? Because just like, well, Frank is a killer, and or Francine is a killer, and so what is it that makes him tick? And so like having transparency in what those, like, oh, it turns out he does 50% more work than you. Oh, weird. But like, if you know that, it's like, okay, cool. I guess I'm not going to watch Succession tonight. And so like you lose that mechanic if you're trying to do like palace intrigue and like, oh, well, like, let's not have transparency of this information. And I think a lot of that kind of comes back to a comfort and a willingness to engage in like data-driven management for managers. Like, oh, I'm afraid of feedback. We're afraid of like public, public display of our performance. And I like to kind of harken this back to, to athletics and high performing professional athletics, or like athletics organizations. Like, guess what? Everybody's batting average is available to everybody on the baseball team, right? Or if people are on the rowing team, like everybody's times and erg times are available there, because it breeds mutual accountability. It allows you to see like what the lead dogs are doing, so that other people can emulate that as well. So like the more that you can have that going on, the better off you are.
There's a lot there, and we could spend a whole lot of time talking about the process and making sure that we're really building transparency. We've hit on a whole heck of a lot today, gentlemen, and we are almost at time. So I want you to just take a second and think about everything that we've covered here today, and think of one key takeaway you want for our audience here as we start to wind down. And I think we've, again, hit on a whole heck of a lot here, but Pete, let's start with you. Just one key takeaway for our audience here today.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would recommend to folks would be just like track your goals, right? Like choose a couple leading indicator goals, like not 6, just like, 2, 3, 4, right? And then like decide on those, and then just start recurringly consuming them, right? On a weekly basis. Just start, right? Like don't worry about the Ironman. Just start doing your 10,000 steps a day, right? To start. Because then now what you've got is you've got the beginnings of a data-driven management habit. And you're like, oh, well, maybe we can, instead of just doing this in team meeting, we do it in pipeline review. Oh, and then maybe we add some more things, right? And so pretty soon, like it's just, you've now infused your organization through data-driven management. It's like the journey of 1,000 steps starts with 1. So just like take that first step is the easiest way to do it.
Awesome. Tanner, one key takeaway today
from I think the thing I've been thinking about the most, and everyone's probably getting tired of me saying it, but like the key to transparency is communication. So like it doesn't have to be in your tech stack. It doesn't have to be over email or whatever. Like everyone has the ability to communicate regardless of your resources. And that's how you create transparency to the best of your ability. So do make it a priority to communicate frequently, whether that's in one-on-ones, whether it's through Slack or through an email or team meetings, all hand meetings, whatever your organization feels is fit and what makes sense for you and your teams, or for you just as an individual, like communicate and over communicate your goals, your transparency, everything.
I think it reminded me of a saying from one of my old mentors: visibility breeds accountability, accountability breeds action. And it feels like we've done a lot of that here today. Pete, Tanner, I know you're both incredibly busy. Thank you so much for taking some time today to share your perspective. On behalf of Taylor and the team behind the scenes, all the folks who attended here live today, and the 20,000 folks in the Modern Sales Pros community, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, gentlemen.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, everybody.